Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World Talks. Well, protests in Georgia against the autocratic rule of the Georgian Dream party continue, largely over its anti-EU stance. The dissatisfaction with Aleksandar Vučić in Serbia has made people take to the streets too. What do the two distant countries have in common? The foreign agents law, based on similar regulations in Russia, which led to chaos in Georgia, is now under debate in the Serbian parliament. And to talk about it, we're joined by Ivana Stradner, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you for accepting it. So will Serbia adopt its own version of the so-called foreign agents law? What's your opinion?
I don't know if Serbia is going to adopt this particular law, but this is not actually the first time that Serbia is discussing this issue. As you already noticed, that Serbian lawmakers actually have begun deliberately, basically this bill, trying to put it before the parliament and to adopt something that Georgia and Russia have also been advocating for. I also want to put this in a little bit larger context, because right now what is happening in Serbia are massive protests after basically 15 people were killed, which is part of, protests that erupted after the fall of a concrete canopy in Novi Sad last month. And that actually resulted in massive protests that are happening on a daily basis. Yesterday, a large number of actually students also joined the rally, which makes very uncomfortable the Serbian government. And they have been looking for different opportunities to make sure, that the West doesn't pay attention to that, but to distract them. And what a better way, to do it than to push right now for a foreign agent law. It's also interesting, actually, who pushed for this law. Basically, all those pro-Russian groups. And it's also part of the game by the Serbian president, who always likes to use those far-right groups to do all those irrational, crazy things to make sure, that Serbia is not in the European Union path, so he can position himself as a pillar of stability and claim, the far-right groups are doing that, but I can make things more peaceful if you support me. I think it's also tremendously important to follow what's happening in the region, because it's not only protests in Serbia, but just recently there was another explosion in Kosovo, which was labeled as a hybrid war and a terrorist attack by Pristina that accused Serbia being behind that. Because as Putin is not doing great in Ukraine, and just look at what's happening right now also in Syria, he's also looking for new opportunities to create chaos in Europe. And what a better way to cause chaos using its proxies in Serbia.
Of course, that's what the Kremlin has been doing for quite a while now. But as you mentioned, Syria and protests against Vučić in Serbia. And now the protesters has been calling him to leave the country the very same way Bashar al-Assad did. So how likely is this to happen?
Look, I've been following the Balkans for a very long time. This is not the first time that there are protests in Serbia. There were massive protests also last year, actually around this time, when the Serbian government accused the West of plotting a color revolution against him, which is a typically authoritarian propaganda against the West. I don't know if this is the beginning of the end of the Serbian president Vučić, but I can tell you there are a lot of people who are absolutely dissatisfied with his non-democratic rule in the country and more repressive actions that he has been pushing there. Make no mistakes, they are going to continue plotting, this whole narrative around the color revolution. And let's also not forget that Russia and Serbia pledged a few years ago to combat together color revolutions. So, and the Russian information space is already flooding, the narratives around the West being behind, plotting a color revolution, which was immediately picked by a local media. And of course, the the Serbian president is pushing that narrative too. I also wanted to emphasize two more things. It's not only Serbia. Pay attention to what's happening right now in Montenegro and also what's
I will ask you about Montenegro. I will also ask you about Bulgaria. But first of all, I'd like still to continue on the subject of on the topic of Serbia. Now, a while ago, Aleksandar Vučić made appearances that he's still following the pro-EU route of Serbia. Now, do you think that he has finally abandoned this this sort of narrative?
Look, he has never wanted to join the European Union. If you listen to carefully his statements in Serbian language, he is rarely using the word that Serbia should join the EU as a member. He is using a very different wording. He says that Serbia is on the EU path. And it's absolutely natural because he would not benefit from the EU seeing Serbia as a member. But the EU funding is something that he will not abandon. He needs the European Union money for his political survival. And as you may have already noticed, what's happening in Europe writ large, the EU policy is in general the policy of appeasement. So they think, by giving Vučić whatever he wants, that he is going to suddenly become pro-EU, which is absolutely ridiculous. He has been trying, he has been using that balancing strategy between China, Russia, and the West, trying to blackmail the West. If you do not support me, he thinks, basically, I will go with Russia and China. And unfortunately, it has worked so far because for people such as Vučić, kindness is weakness. And as I mentioned, he has no aspirations to join the EU. Pay attention to one more thing, which is the BRICS. Basically, of course, that Serbia would not benefit from joining the BRICS, but nevertheless, that's been also the narrative spread, by the Serbian government, trying, to use that again to blackmail the West. And I also want to go back to the foreign agent law. Why, on one side, I am concerned because of all repressive efforts that Serbian government has been pushing in the country, but on the other hand, it's also the part of blackmailing effort by the Serbian government to tell the West, if you do not support the Serbian government, we are going to adopt this law. And the reason why I wanted to mention Montenegro and Bosnia and Herzegovina, because recently a very similar effort was pushed actually in October in Montenegro by the Coalition for the Future of Montenegro, which includes, some pro-Russian parties to push for a similar law. A very similar thing happened a few months ago in Republika Srpska in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where Milorad Dodik...
But they have withdrawn from the idea. So what exactly happened in Bosnia that this law hasn't been adopted?
So you're absolutely right. They withdrew, from this particular law, which was also the part of the game. And that's why I believe, that a very similar thing might happen very soon also in Serbia, because there were numerous, pushbacks coming from the EU, but also from Washington, pushing basically Milorad Dodik to the brink and basically calling out his bluff, because he needs the EU for his political survival, just as President Vučić needs the EU for his political survival, ironically, because of all the funding that is necessary, for his political survival. So it's literally like a sword with two edges. On one side, it is definitely just shows how the country is moving towards more authoritarian path. But on the other hand, the EU has to understand that Serbia needs the EU more than the EU needs Serbia. It's just the question of fears among numerous EU policymakers who think that the policy of appeasement is the one that is going to change Vučić's calculus, which is not going to happen. Make no mistake, he is going to continue to use Beijing and Moscow for his games against the West. And unfortunately, it works so far, and I'm afraid until Washington and Brussels wake up, it's going to continue this way.
Mm-hmm. Now, the similar thing also happens in Bulgaria. Now, what's going on with the Bulgaria's far-right foreign agents law initiative?
So one thing that Russia understood early on by pushing for that narrative domestically about foreign agent law that was recently proved very helpful for the Georgian Dream. Now authoritarian regimes and the far-right groups in the West are learning from that they can use this foreign agent law to punish NGO sector, but also to show that the West is a paper tiger, making sure that the EU doesn't act on and doesn't prevent such laws to be adopted. So a similar thing, is happening right now in Bulgaria. And as I mentioned, when you start really connecting all those dots, Kyrgyzstan, some threats in Hungary, Georgia, Montenegro, Bosnia-Herzegovina, now Serbia, when you start really connecting the dots and who has been pushing for those narratives, it tells you all you need to know that this is part of Russia's hybrid warfare that has been used by local proxies in the West, in all those countries. And I actually think that all those efforts are going to continue to proliferate because we saw, unfortunately, what happened in Georgia, and like-minded parties across Central, Eastern, and Western Europe are learning. And the worst part of this is they're trying to make analogy with American similar law that we have here, but absolutely we cannot make analogy because the U.S. made this law a long time ago for different purposes compared to how authoritarian regimes right now are trying to use this law.
So we're witnessing a major hybrid operation orchestrated in Moscow. But as we are talking also about Georgia a bit, the foreign agents law, the introduction of the law led to mass protests in Georgia. It seems they are dying at the moment. Now, what's your prediction for the near future in Georgia?
I attended multiple times interviews with TVP World where I was discussing Georgia, and I've been worried about the country for the past few years, because when you start really connecting the dots and think about Russia's invasion in Ukraine, you realize that this war in Ukraine, it's not only about Ukraine. This is truly democracy versus autocracy. And this is precisely why Putin, with the help of local proxies, have been trying to show that the West is a paper tiger and the democracy in the West is dying. And I think it's been one of the gravest mistakes by the European Union for not helping enough people in Georgia, because if we perceive this current war in Ukraine as the one ideologically also driven by Putin, trying to show that democracy is nothing more than a paper tiger, we are subconsciously helping him. And the thing is, we all know in the West what is really happening in Georgia. But once you acknowledge, you have to do something about that. And unfortunately, the question, the policy of appeasement by the European Union, but also here in Washington, D.C., has been shown to be very ineffective, whether in Georgia or elsewhere. My concern is that now, with the situation in Georgia, other countries are learning that some of them cannot rely on the West, but also far-right groups are also learning that the West is not going to act, that is not going to act and to deter them. So whether, the EU wanted to help Georgia for idealistic reasons or not, it was not a question of idealism. It was the question of the protection of national security and the European security of really huge.
And so it seems that the EU has failed. Ivana Stradner, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, was our guest this evening. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. And thank you for watching, and stay with us for more, as more World Talks are coming up.